What's up, guys? Thanks so much for stopping by again. Today we have another in our series where we're covering some of the different factions in the Birthright campaign setting specifically. This is part of our little series here covering the nations in Annuir in the southern coast region, and we're going to go today with Roesone, which is one of the more popular ones to start with and kind of gives you a lot of things to play with. It's a sizable country, a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of challenges as well. So overall, the alignment of the country is neutral. It is recommended, which means players can, PCs, in other words, can choose this country to play as opposed to certain sort of NPC-led countries that you don't get to run yourself, basically. It's got an interesting history, in some of these smaller nations in the southern coast here all kind of tied together, as it used to all be part of a larger kingdom, Daimed, which still exists but in a smaller form, and there's some enmity between the sort of breakaway states from that. But anyway, this is also a relatively new country as far as some of these Annuirian countries go. So, as it says here in the description at the top, the Black Baron Dane Roesone cobbled together the 7 provinces of his kingdom from the pieces of decrepit Daimed 80 years ago. So you have your 7 different provinces there. None of them are necessarily all that largely settled, except Caracas, the capital one, is pretty solid with a 4 there as far as sort of level of population and civilization. Some of the lesser civilized ones or lesser populated ones do have a little bit of magical potential, and there's some pretty solid competition between who controls those. Religion-wise, or let's start with law, the current ruler, Marley Roesone, MR, and that's one of the tough things is always just kind of making sense of all these different abbreviations. Yeah, she is the current ruler. She controls pretty much sort of uncontested as far as who controls the law in her country. That being said, she doesn't have like sort of the law maxed out in any of her provinces, so she's not necessarily overly harsh in her rule there or enforcement of the law. That being said, if you're thinking about playing this one, that's one to maybe start raising up the level on those just a little bit to avoid other potential neighbors from trying to influence or gain influence in your country that way. Not that you should allow that. And in either case, religion-wise, it's essentially what's called the impregnable heart of Halen, which is kind of like the main god of the setting here. And by and large, there's just various sects of the Church of Halen throughout the Annuirian country. We'll probably do a separate video on that at some point too. But by and large, that is the religion in all the provinces here. Although in the capital, there is a small holding of what's called Roernil's celestial spell, which is a different god. And then the leader there is Surus Enlian. We'll talk about that a little bit later. On the guild side, there's some pretty hefty competition between various contenders there. So you have Orthian Tane of the Southern Annuir Shipping and Imports. You have EH, which is El Hadid, the Port of Call Exchange. And then SG as CLA Gorid or Goried of the Spider River Traders. So there's lots and lots of competition going on there. And then, as I said, even though the country is fairly settled, it doesn't have like any provinces like, let's say, a Renway, where there's like hardly any people, and there's huge numbers on the sort of the second number there in that fraction, basically to represent the magical potential. Nonetheless, pretty much everything is claimed here. So you got some competition between High Mage Elias or Elias. You have Roger Aglondir, who's your neighbor in the country Ilion, that's sort of one province country to your southwest. It's pretty much between those guys sort of duking it out to control all the magical potential in your country. So that being said, that's kind of a quick breakdown of that. So, and then we usually get a nice little description of who controls what and what's going on there. So on the law side, again, Marley Roesone controls half the law in Caracas and Gorid, 2 of 3 levels in Bellum, and 1 of 3 levels in each of the other provinces. We saw that. On the temple side, basically, again, everything's almost, it's dominated by the impregnable heart of Halen. Guilds, you have, as it says here, there's a vicious underground war to control that. The trade in the country, and that is something that you might have to deal with depending on how your DM wants to approach that, but something you probably don't want to let get out of control there. So you'd definitely have some work to sort of play those three against each other and try and make sure that's, again, working to your benefit. And then on the sources, High Mage Elias from Erenwe, and Roger Aglandir basically are each kind of vying for magic in your country. So somewhat friendly vying right now, nothing like outright cutthroat or anything. And again, it's a tricky balancing act because you are basically sandwiched between essentially, what is it, four different countries. Three of them are essentially your allies, although Gore to the north, even though in the description here doesn't say like there's really any enmity, it is a large sort of military threat. And then there's always the Spiderfell as well. So again, we'll more on that a little bit later. Regency does have a fair bit accumulated there, and sort of a solid income as far as Regency is sort of the resource you use to be able to do your different actions and how successful you'll be as a ruler in getting that accomplished. So there's a fair bit to start with, and a decent, if not okay sized treasury there of 15 gold bars. So that being said, you're definitely going to want to put in some work to sort of raise the economy a little bit in the country to your benefit, and whether that's going to involve dealing with the guilds or opening trade routes or anything else, but you definitely do want a little bit coming in. You do have a decent sized army too, as it says here, although not as large as that of its northern neighbor Gore, remains sizable enough to give nearby kingdoms pause before they would consider moving in. So you do have 3 units of archers, a unit of artillerists, a unit of knights, 3 units of pikes, and a unit of infantry. So it's pretty decent for now, but again, neither of the smaller neighbors to your east and west really are a threat, although the Spiderfell, depending on what the DM decides to do with that, could rampage out and kind of probably not seriously threaten you, but certainly wear down some of your units in combat. But again, Gore, if they really wanted to invade, I think when we cover them, I think they have something like easily triple the size of your army, but some of their neighbors keep that country in check currently, at least. But again, anything can happen in a campaign depending on how many players are involved and what else is going on. So the regent herself, if you do want to play as her, so she's a level 5 fighter, bloodline of Brenna, major 25. She's just actually true neutral. She's the great granddaughter of the Black Baron, and basically kind of has some interesting family history there, where her dad, her grandfather Morgan, may have slain his own father, the original founder, for control of the country. So she does have apparently some of those violent outbursts every now and then, but by and large is a decent ruler and a respected ruler. So as it says here, yeah, her people feel no great love for her, but neither do they find her taxes and laws too oppressive. So in the sense that she's true neutral, the people they don't really they're not necessarily like in love with her as a ruler, as far as like we saw with how devoted the people of Erenwe are to their queen. But on the other hand, they're just fine with her as a ruler. There's no real like resistance to her rule. That being said, there's probably some things you would want to do to improve that image, and again, sort of fix and improve some things in the country, just to sort of build up your might, if again your intent is to make a play for the Iron Throne, or just build up the power of your country in general. So, and at some point that might involve expansion as well. So, because you do have some enemies there. So she currently does not have any lieutenants, so that could be an interesting role-playing opportunity there, whether again you're playing the game as ruling this country, or if you're playing with other your friends, of course, in like a campaign, rather than having just everyone run a separate country, the rest of your party, you could nominate one of them as one of your lieutenants, or all of your lieutenants and stuff like that, and role play it that way. So again, there's just many different ways to approach playing a Birthright campaign, which is one of the neat things there. Some of the other important NPCs, though, the mayor of the capital, it does have a bloodline, Michael Aglanier. He's a thief, just a very small bloodline, but he's lawful good. As it says here, bluff-friendly sort, and is intensely devoted to the Baroness. There's potential romantic rumors there, but no proof there, but that could be something that could be played up against you, depending on the veracity of that. The noble families are all rather ambitious, as it says here, sort of looking to improve themselves at the expense of others. So something you might want to also keep an eye on, depending on what the DM decides to play up there, so some internal issues. And as it says here, it's mostly friendly, but that could could boil over into some outright hostilities here. So they give you a little hook here. The Isilvieres and the Bellamese both descend from Old Dane Roesone's lieutenants, and by and large right now, it hasn't sort of broken out into outright fighting, but that could be coming soon. So again, you might have several little time bombs ticking in your country that you might need to deal with. As far as description, so mainly grasslands and farmlands, several smaller towns, roughly 500 people in population there. It does include a little bit of that larger forested area, the Erebanian, which we talked about when we were looking at Erenwe, but sort of very beautiful part of woodland that people do want to see protected. So you definitely want to control your guilds from interfering with that. And by and large, as it says here, most of the people still have that frontier mentality, just because it isn't, again, it being a rather new kingdom still, or barony, I guess. It's still largely unsettled, and when your capital is only essentially a level 4 here, it's not that all that populated either. So some interesting adventuring possibilities here, though. Lots of ruined castles all over the place. So a lot of treasure hunting potential there. And let's see here, the capital itself, in Caracas, and it's the city Proudglaive, takes its name from the armies who fought and died in the wars that brought about the birthing of Roesone. So a population of about 10,000, so a pretty solid city, but not nearly as large as some of the other neighboring kingdoms can boast. People seem friendly but guarded and quick to judge those who would deal with them. So, but rather cosmopolitan, though. Humans, elves, dwarves, and halflings, actually. And again, just with the situation with elves, of course, in the setting, so it's always interesting to see them in these areas as well. On the trade goods side, so the farms produce grains, barley, wheat, and corn as your typical trade staples there, but also cattle and cotton. And with textiles mainly being in the south there, as it says. North is more agricultural, and then you do have some actually existing trade routes, which you do want to make sure you try and maintain. But basically, between Proudglaive and Ilion, which is not a very long trade route, but still an important one, and from Bellum to Shieldhaven in Moorreed, which is rather important, but does unfortunately run through Gore, which of course makes any hostilities between the two of your country and them a little bit tricky there. So on the Allied side, you do have Ilion and Medoir on your western areas, and basically because of how small those countries are, and not necessarily weak, but they certainly can't really boast armies. Even the relatively light levels that you have. So basically, they've kind of tied their fortunes to yours. So something that you can use to your advantage in any negotiations that come up. And if you ever did want to do some friendly expanding to the west, just to deal with your actual kind of enemy, Diomed, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But as all three of them are basically new kingdoms, and those are the three that kind of split apart from Diomed, that ruler of that country's been scheming in many ways to try and reclaim those territories, so far unsuccessful. But yeah, as it says here, the rulers of these three countries have learned to trust each other as much as regions can trust one another, which is oh so true. So again, depending on how you are playing the campaign, whether it's again everybody running a separate country, or you running the country and the rest of your PC allies are your lieutenants or other people running things in the country, whether it's like the temples or guilds or whatever, you got some interesting options that way. And you could, depending on how much you build up your strength, you could if you wanted to play up the existential threat of that western neighbor Diomed, you might sort of try to more officially sort of form alliances there, and kind of maybe even for the protection of your Western allies, kind of take them over in that sense. And you could promote their current rulers to heads of some of the other important positions if you wanted to expand that way. Enemies, so though Gore's armies frequently wander across the border into Roesone, there's no real enmity there. But that being said, when you read the description of Gore, like that guy is looking to at some point start a war somewhere. Unfortunately, there's so many countries bordering him, so they in that sense kind of keep him in check. But he's got the size, the resources, and really the military might to very quickly launch into a war and very quickly take over territory. So if Gore did want to seriously look at you, you could slow them down, but not really, I think, stand up for too long until you build up your own forces, and again, just sort of build a better economy as well. So the only true animosity toward the Baroness comes from the ruler of Diomed, who has regained some of their strength lost by his ancestors. Though he has not declared war just yet, basically everyone, it's like an open secret, essentially, that he's wanting to reclaim all those lands that have been lost. And then the Baroness, well aware of his desire, spends much of her time trying to uncover his plots and untie the threads of conspiracy he has woven to regain these lands. She has cunningly enlisted the assistance of the Aranweans, Queen's lieutenants, who subtly aid her against his machinations. So again, that's one area where you're maybe a little bit weak right now because you don't have any stated lieutenants, and you're kind of relying on your eastern neighbor for that, and they would probably come to your aid too, if you were attacked. But that being said, things change all the time, and you never know what that guy Diomed might be scheming. So whether again it's another PC running that kingdom or the DM running it and kind of letting all these schemes and stuff play out. So you have a lot of little things that you need to keep track of and kind of but are distracting you from maybe running your country more properly and building it up. Some other special things here. The Arabanian dominates Abator, or Tuar, the southern province. So again, we talked about that a little bit when we spoke in our Arenway video, to go check that out. But an interesting ability that she has, which, if you don't want to play as her, you could say maybe she did have a successor at some point, or she passes her bloodline onto you. But her blood ability lets her see through the eyes of cats, so it's basically a crime to harm any kind of felines in the country. So, and basically the punishment for that matches what the harm done to the animal there. So interesting little role-playing tidbit that you could use there, but also an interesting way for you to maybe kind of develop a spy network as well through felines, and pretty much no one would suspect that. So it's an interesting army, and one that is it being the very first one in the book here is also just a great starter kingdom if you want like a little bit of everything. A decent army, decent economy, really fascinating history. Lots of challenges though, but nothing like immediately almost like nerve-wracking or back-breaking like some of the other countries in their starting positions. So it's a great country. You have a lot of opportunity here, but you're still going to have to manage a lot of your allies, potential enemies, both human and non-human. They didn't really mention the Spiderfell much here, but that is an existential threat for all the countries that border it. You have a lot of internal things that you kind of probably want to get straightened out here in the form of like the underground guild war, because you don't want that spilling over and causing you other issues there. But you have to be careful on how you approach that. The wizardly competition so far is also a little bit, not outright hostility, but you still want to keep that in check, because the people competing for that are from your eastern and western neighbors. So lots of interesting little bits there, all while you do face some very real issues in the form of sort of essentially raising up the level of your provinces to start generating more income and resources and stuff like that. You do want to maybe raise up the level of your law holdings a little bit, just to make sure there aren't any other foreign influences that might find a way to sort of weasel their way into positions there. And for now there doesn't seem to be any religious issues, which is a fortunate thing, but you can also again use some of those things to your advantages in any political negotiations with your neighbors and the people running those things. So overall, a fascinating country, and again, you have a solid army to start with too. Treasury definitely needs some work, so again, just great opportunities, but also great challenges, while not being I would say, like, if this were like a difficulty level in a video game, I would say this is probably like average difficulty. There are some countries that like your starting position is kind of precarious, so I would say those are like on hard mode, but this is overall pretty manageable. You just have to essentially play, be a semi-competent ruler, let's put it that way. So But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed our little review through Roesone here. We will be covering pretty much all the nations in Annuir and all the other factions. It's going to definitely be a series that will develop over time, but hope you guys enjoy this one. I think in our next one we will be covering Ilion, and then kind of moving westward just to get through the other nations. So thanks so much for stopping in, guys. Let us know if you've played as Roesone or against it or just in it. Be happy to hear from you guys. There is a product that came out, part of that player's guide to various countries, which we will cover separately at one point as well. A whole series of those, since we do own all of them, but that will come a little bit later. But those are always neat because they give you a sort of a deep dive into the country if you did want to play as that. So let us know in the comments, guys. We do appreciate you stopping by. Thanks so much again, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.